Hello, Happy New Year. Welcome to another episode of Technical Hurting. Today I'm doing a little fight preview for Holloway versus Kattar, which is coming up this weekend in the UFC's featherweight division. Holloway, of course, is coming off two hair-splittingly close losses with champ Alexander Volkanovski, and Kattar is coming from wins over Dan Ige and Jeremy Stephens. I think if Kattar wins this fight, he's almost certainly going to be getting a shot at the title against Volkanovski. I doubt that's the case for Holloway, given the fact he's just had two very close losses against Volk, but I guess we'll see. I'm going to start off with the tail of the tape. Both men stand at 1.8 metres tall, or 5 feet 11 inches in old money, and Kattar is coming in with a notable reach advantage here, almost 9 centimetres or 4 inches, which is where starts to be some difference between the two of them. Holloway does have visibly shorter arms than most fighters his height, and despite towering over Volkanovski, he went into the fight, or both fights, as the man with the shorter reach. It wasn't too much of a problem for him there, as he had a height advantage over Volk, which negated the reach disadvantage. Although he doesn't have this luxury against Kattar, he's going to be enjoying 100% of this reach advantage. I think this reach advantage is likely to be pretty important on Saturday night, actually. Both Max and Calvin are about the best at boxing range in the UFC featherweight division. Both men have demonstrated a really versatile arsenal of other strikes, and I'll touch on this a little bit later on, but the pair both rely more often than not on having a really solid boxing game to build things off, and then occasionally working more flashy kicks in amongst that. And the similarities there go a little bit deeper than that as well. Both of them use a lot of linear punches, your jabs and crosses, and then fire off a lot of left hooks, or lead hooks as well, when both of them do switch stance, Holloway in particular. I think both fighters here have particular uses of their jabs as well, which there's three that I want to touch on, because again, they're similar between the two of them. Firstly, on the front foot, both fighters will often use the jab as a measuring stick for the rear hand, with a quarter beat cross behind it, in sort of the way that Nate Diaz does. The benefit of this is temporarily covering the opponent's vision so that the rapid cross isn't seen until it's too late to really do much about it, as well as guiding the rear hand towards the target. The only thing is, once it's been done 2 or 3 times, you've got a sense for the rhythm, and it's fairly straightforward to counter it. But if you've been able to land it a few times and rock your opponent, then perhaps they haven't been able to counter it, or perhaps they don't even remember really what speed it landed at, and it can keep landing for the duration of a fight. Both guys will also throw their jabs with similar speed, but chaining 2, 3 or even 4 jabs together while circling away from the fence. It's a pretty low energy way to get yourself away from the fence without the high risk of simply walking away without covering yourself with some sort of strike. You'll also see both of them, in particular Calvin, move in a fairly linear line forwards off the fence and push through the opponent, but that's a little bit less common, and they both like to sort of circle out off the fence when cornered. And lastly, the pair will both use sort of stiff arm jab defence really well, especially when they're on the back foot, popping out a jab, and then rather than retracting it, keeping it there as they move away with their feet and with their upper body, keeping it in the opponent's face, ensuring that there's some sort of barrier between the two of them. Kattar in particular will also use the stiff arm and sort of sweep it to the outside to shove opponents off balance as he exits, which gives him a few extra hundredths of a second to move while they're slightly off balance. With the stiff arm defence, Kattar especially needs to be mindful of this bit. It's a really great way to keep the range while protecting your head, but it does open you up for strikes to the body, in particular body kicks. Holloway does well to throw throwaway kicks at an escaping opponent when he knows they're out of range of his punches, and punctuates the end of his combinations with body kicks quite frequently. Kattar really ought to be mindful of this risk if he is using the stiff arm defence to back away from Holloway, because his ribs are going to get splattered by Max's right foot. And Holloway's kicks, I guess, follow on from this bit quite nicely. He has in recent fights strayed away from his elaborate kicking game that he showed us early in his UFC days, but in the second fight against Volkanovski, he brought a bit of that back. He was using some wild kicks in there, coupled with constant hip feinting, some head feints as well, to really befuddle Volkanovski and cause him to slow down significantly, which helped him over the course of the fight. As well as his usual use of teeps and round kicks, Holloway also flashed in quite a lot of snap kicks in there, a couple of back kicks, and even a scissor kick at one point, which is the swing your back leg up and then kick with your front leg. I think it was a scissor front kick, so sort of scissor snap kick. Think Lyoto Machida knocking out Randy Couture, except with rather than the rear leg sort of stopping at the bottom and having a pendulum kick, the rear leg comes up and jumps up too. It really kept Volkanovski guessing the whole way through the fight, and as I said, it slowed down his offence. 2 or 3 fights ago, I think this kind of kicking would have completely shut down Calvin Kattar, He didn't have great ability to work well in exchanges, rather he just kind of ran off until the barrage of punches and kicks and elbows and knees stopped. At some point during his preparation for the Jeremy Stephens fight, he must have done something about this, I guess in anticipation of the fact that Stephens is pretty unrelenting when on the front foot. He'll keep going. If he thinks he has you, he'll keep going a bit more, and he doesn't necessarily stop. You need to hit him with something back, and Kattar was actually decent at that from the Stephens fight, and then also in the Ige fight. His one flaw here that does persist is his tendency to retreat straight backwards, which makes it a lot easier for the opponent to chase and corner him. He's possibly got slightly worse at this, if I'm honest, over time. I think his retreating on angles to avoid a linear attack was a bit better when he fought Moicano back in 2018 than it has been over the last couple of fights in 2020. The upshot of that is that if Calvin can't keep Max on the back foot, or is at least very hesitant in his attacks, Max is going to start piecing Kattar up as he retreats. But let's say for a moment the opposite happens. Kattar likely has a slight advantage in the power department, which means that he could get Max backpedaling. While Calvin Kattar does throw a lot of switching combinations similar to Poirier and will attack in zigzag blitz movements, which make it a bit harder to read and make backwards movements a bit more difficult, a bit more confusing for a defending fighter, he often doesn't consider about the overall cage positioning of himself and his opponent and ends up chasing them rather than cutting off the cage, which is where Blessed will most likely take the centre of the cage again. At this point in my analysis, I'm already leaning towards Holloway, and another reason I think Holloway wins is their difference in feints. Calvin does have some feints. He'll use stutter steps, he'll use sort of half punch feints where he half throws his one hand forward and throws the other, or doesn't throw anything and bounces back out to then counter, but he doesn't tend to do much more than that. And I doubt Max is going to bite on many of them over the course of the 5 rounds. He might do early doors, but once he's read them, he's actually pretty good at picking up on them. It took a lot of constant feinting and really complex feinting for Volkanovski to get Max to really start believing what Volk was showing him. Conversely, Max himself has shown himself to be a pretty tricky feint artist at times, and has really good hip feints of pushing his hip forward to then throw a punch, or throwing his shoulders around to then throw a kick in there, and really hides a lot of really smart strikes in there that you might not expect. So yeah, I can see in that department Max taking a lead there. And going off from that, I guess both fighters are sen-no-sen strikers. I think it's sen-no-sen anyway. There are 3 Japanese terms which stem from karate originally: go-no-sen, sen-sen-no-sen, and sen-no-sen. One of them means to counter after the opponent is thrown, which I think is go-no-sen. Sen-sen-no-sen, I believe, is to lead the dance and take initiative the whole way through. And sen-no-sen is to work out when the opponent's about to throw, based off their timing, their body language, reading their feints, and just beating them to the punch. So when they're about to attack you, stop them from even initiating the strike, countering before they strike, that is. But both guys are pretty good at understanding their opponents and striking to break up the opponent's timing as they're about to throw. This is again another really key use of the jab and feeds into what I said before about feinting and reading feints. Finally, one last thing I want to talk about is 5-round experience, where there's a clear lack of experience for the Boston finisher. Max has competed in 8 5-rounders on the trot, with the last 4 of these lasting a full 25 minutes. Just as a side note here, while I was writing up these notes, I almost completely forgot that he fought Frankie Edgar. I think it's possibly one of the least talked about featherweight title fights in the UFC, despite having 2 of the best in the division's history, and 2 of the biggest names for that matter as well, competing in it. Anyway, back on track. It's pretty crazy that someone who's still a year away from the age of 30 has managed to compete for so many minutes in the octagon, giving him cage and preparation experience very few fighters can rival. And Kattar has only had 1 5-round fight in his UFC career, which was his most recent outing in July against Dan Ige, where both fighters looked absolutely knackered after the first 17-18 minutes or so. If he hasn't managed to improve either his cardio or his energy management since then, he's almost certainly in for a rough night against Holloway. Given all that I've discussed, I'm leaning towards a Holloway decision here. I think Kattar could take an early round. Despite having moments of great head movement, Max is a really, really hittable fighter, and 1 or 2 good shots from Kattar could take a round from him. But I see it mostly being a fairly one-sided affair from the Hawaiian, Max, and I see Max likely spending a lot of time on the front foot, just outside of Kattar's range, and popping back out again on some nice angles. Let me know what you think of my analysis in the comments. If you enjoyed listening, it'd be great if you could like and subscribe. That really helps me getting these videos noticed by the algorithm. This episode is out a little bit late too, I was hoping to have it out earlier in the week. Unfortunately, things haven't quite gone to plan. There are a few great things in the pipeline, which I'm really excited to share with you. Not right now, but hopefully in the coming weeks we'll have some exciting news. Anyway, until next time.